So this video started out as one thing, and then while getting what I needed for this video, I went down multiple rabbit holes and it's blown out into something more than what I had originally planned. Before I jump in though, I just want to welcome all my new subscribers. I want to welcome all my members. I appreciate all of you. Your support helps my channel a great deal. If you are not subscribed, please do subscribe. I'm hoping to reach 7,000 subscribers by the end of this year, and you can help me do that. I also just want to give a shout out and thank you to the people who've been doing the buying me a coffee and doing super chats and super thanks. Thanks to your support, I have just managed to order myself a new boom arm for my microphone so that I don't find myself having to constantly lift the microphone back up into position while I'm trying to record. And of course, you've helped me get just a little bit closer to being able to buy myself a MacBook to make life so much easier for me in terms of the content that I'm putting out. So my specific focus for this video is what exactly did Daniel, Janie and Malaya tell us in terms of the children's disappearance. So I've got a number of clips that I'm going to go through, and there's some things that I want to highlight as I'm going through. I'm going to start with Janie because she's the one who said the most here. My thoughts on Janie in terms of her coming out and sharing this story. Number one, I believe that the only reason that she came out publicly is because she's protecting her sons, or one or both of her sons. But I also kind of feel from looking at the documents that Janie was probably given a fairly basic script to remember. Something that didn't have a lot of details. So probably I heard the children outside, I heard Daniel yelling for the children to come in, and I ran into Malaya and she said the children have been missing for 20 minutes. I think that was the entire script that Janie was given. And she was meant to stick to that script. Because as you know, Janie's stories get a little bit tangled. And when Janie's stories get a little bit tangled, she leaks information. So what we're hearing in this video in terms of what may have happened with the children, I think is Janie going off script. Okay, so let's jump in and listen to Janie.
How do I know they weren't in the woods to such a brief search? I know those kids. I've observed those kids. As I said, I walked with those kids through the woods. I had to carry Jack through the woods. He wouldn't go through the woods. He would stand there. He wouldn't go over a branch. He wouldn't go under a branch. I had to carry him over them. So I know they're not in the woods. As I said, I don't even like going through the woods because I don't like walking over trees and branches and bush. Can you imagine a 6 and a 4-year-old going through the woods? You guys seen through videos of what the searchers went through. There's no way that a 6 and a 4-year-old could go through those woods. Believe me.
So if you remember, this all occurred on a Facebook chat. So Janie was recording her answers to people's questions. So someone's question must have been to her, how do you know they're not in the woods? The search was done in 6 days. So her response here is, how do I know they weren't in the woods for such a brief search? And then she goes on to explain the reasons why she believes that. But what is significant here in terms of saying that, how do I know they weren't in the woods for such a brief search? She's essentially avoiding saying whether or not they were in the woods before the search began. She's essentially saying, how do I know they weren't in the woods during the search? You'll note also, and this could just be the way she's responding to the question, we don't know how the question was worded, but she's not saying, how do I know they didn't wander off into the woods? How do I know they didn't get lost in the woods? How do I know they didn't go into the woods? All she's telling her audience here is that she knows they weren't in the woods when people were searching. Now, I'm not going to put too much weight on this initial statement because, like I said, you can tell it is a response to a question, and quite often when people respond to questions, they may repeat the question. So this may not necessarily be her wording. This may be the wording of whoever asked her the question. But then she goes on to explain why she knows that they weren't in the woods when the searchers were searching. She's like, she had to carry Jack through the woods. He wouldn't go through the woods. He wouldn't go over or under branches. And she's like, I don't even like going through the woods, walking over trees and branches and stuff. And then she goes with this nice little neat persuasive question. Can you imagine a 6 and a 4-year-old going through the woods? And clearly she realises she's hit on a really good argument there, because she then goes on with her classic Janie, believe me, and goes on to emphasise that a 6 and a 4-year-old wouldn't go through the woods. But this whole, can you imagine a 6 and a 4-year-old, is basically saying, are you really that stupid that you would believe that? So she's basically gaslighting her audience. But there's something about the language that she's using here that I hadn't actually picked up on before. She never refers to the children going into the woods. All she refers to here is them going through the woods. So essentially, she has placed them in the woods, but they're not going anywhere. They've gone into the woods, but they're not going through the woods. They've just entered the woods, if that makes sense. And I'll put a pin in that and come back to it and explain it a bit more later. But she has emphasised every single statement here. She has to carry Jack through the woods. He wouldn't go through the woods. She doesn't like going through the woods. Can you imagine a 6 and a 4-year-old going through the woods? She's not actually saying they wouldn't go into the woods. She's just saying that when they were there, they wouldn't go through the woods. We'll come back to that.
My first instinct when she told me that the kids were missing was check the woods. That's what I did.
Right.
And when I found out they were not in the woods, I said they're not in the woods.
So after working really, really hard to establish that they wouldn't have gone through the woods, she's now telling us the first thing, her first instinct when she found out they were missing was to check the woods. Now, we've listened to this so many times and thought, this woman is balmy. On one hand, she's saying these kids aren't going to go through the woods. And then the next moment she's saying her first thought was, check the woods. These statements actually can coexist. And I'll come back to that shortly, because I want to address this bizarre statement where she says, when I found out that they weren't in the woods, I said, they're not in the woods. So apparently she somehow found out that they weren't in the woods. Was it like a divine vision? Some angel came down and said, Janie, because you're such a saintly woman, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight. Those children aren't in the woods. And having had that revelation, it was like a hallelujah moment. So she's going around telling everyone, they're not in the woods. The angel came down and told me. That doesn't seem likely. But she's saying, when I found out they weren't in the woods, that means someone has told her specifically, they're not in the woods. Someone has told her that confidently. And she knows it as a truth. She found out they're not in the woods. She knows they're not in the woods. It's not when I figured out that actually they're probably not in the woods because of the search. No, she's saying I found out they're not in the woods. Who would know that they're not in the woods? One, maybe two people aside from Janie. It wasn't some revelation from up above. One of the other people on that property told Janie, yeah, no, they're not in the woods. She was given the all clear to say, yeah, they're not in the woods. She's essentially telling us here that someone gave her notes to add to her script so that she could now say to people, they're not in the woods. Because that wouldn't be giving the game away, because she found out that they weren't. Essentially, the reason why that one sentence sounds so odd is because it's leakage. She has told us she knows they're not in the woods. She's told us she has been told they are not in the woods. And so now she is able to confidently tell people they are not in the woods. This is the beginning of the abduction narrative, because she wants people to believe that since her and Daniel are both so confident that the children aren't in the woods, she wants people to forget about the other possibility that they're not in the woods because they've been put somewhere else by the people who are responsible for them no longer being around. She doesn't want people to go down that track. She wants people to draw the conclusion that they have been abducted. Don't forget, this comes after Durwood made his stage debut. And it was around this time, that Janie and Daniel decided that actually they kind of liked his script. Now, they didn't, at that point in time, want to be quite as ballsy as Durwood and lie outright. We know that by the time Daniel was doing that interview on the Turkey show, that he had adopted that strategy. You heard that big, long explanation about the second blanket, which of course I emailed the RCMP about, and they're like, no, there wasn't a second blanket. There were two pieces of the one blanket found. Full stop, end of story. And yet Daniel had this complete elaborate story. I also suspect that he was having a mathematician moment when he was doing that interview, let's say. But he only started adopting that straight-out lying strategy that Durwood had been doing around that time. Janie hasn't got there yet. Janie just gives people a nudge in the direction that she wants them to go. So she has not outright said, they've been abducted. Instead, she's saying things that are kind of half-truths so that people will draw their conclusions, and that the conclusions they are drawing are the ones that she's trying to push them towards. When it comes to Janie, I think her strategy appears to be, rather than telling outright lies, she's a little bit creative with the truth. Not only is she a little bit creative with the truth, but in doing so, she likes to say things that's going to nudge people to believe what she wants them to believe, like I just said. So while we're listening to Janie's statements, we need to keep in mind that on one hand, she tends not to come out with bold-faced lies. But on the other hand, she is trying to manipulate our perception with what she says, and there's usually a little bit or a little bit more truth in her statements.
The only time they go anywhere up in the woods is when my other two grandchildren are here. And they're always kept an eye on by me. And if Daniel's in the yard, he watches them too. And the kids have never wandered away or never gone in the woods by themselves in the last 2 years. Why all of a sudden would they do it Friday morning?
So in this instance, she's talking about them going up to that little fort up in the woods. And you'll notice her speech pattern has changed. She doesn't talk about them going through the woods in this statement. She says if they go anywhere up in the woods. So in her mind, going to that fort is going up in the woods. It's not going through the woods, it's just going up in the woods. And she's qualifying that by saying, well, the only time they do that is when my grandchildren are here. Now, I don't believe that's a bold-faced lie, but I do think she's playing with the truth a little bit there. Because she's already told us that when Malaya said the children were missing, her first thought was to go check in the woods. So that makes a lie of the statement that they would only go in the woods when her two grandchildren are there. It suggests to me that there were times when they would go up to that little fort on their own without her grandchildren. At this moment, however, it is convenient for Janie's narrative to say that they would only do it with her grandchildren. And yes, maybe it is an activity that they liked to do with her grandchildren. You know what children are like when they get together? They like to have their little hidey hole away from the grown-ups, where they can just be kids and no one's telling them what to do. We're talking about a 4-year-old, 2 6-year-olds and an 8-year-old. So yes, I could imagine that it was a thing for them to go up there. That was their little hideout. But, you know, we're talking about a 6-year-old here as the older child. That's an age when children do start becoming a little bit adventurous. I suspect that there were no restraints in terms of where they could go on that property. And I'm just going to throw in a bit of audio here that backs up that idea.
So I asked her, I said, we're here to search. So you know your kids. You're the mom. Moms know their kids. You know what takes their interest, where they like to go around the yard, where you have to get after them all the time. And she said they always like to play up by their fort. So I told her we would start up there.
So, of course, the great thing about accounts from Belinda is that we know she's not trying to sell us anything. She is telling the truth. So she's telling us that when they arrived to help search, and she asked Malaya, well, they're your kids, you know them best, where would they be likely to go? And Malaya said they always like to play up by the fort. So in terms of Janie saying they only go up there with her grandchildren, that's not truthful. You could say it's a bold-faced lie, but it's not the Daniel kind of bold-faced lies. It's just altering the facts just a little bit. Sure, they like to go up and play there with her grandchildren. She just added a little bit on that, they only go up there with them, which isn't accurate. Because at this point in time, she's trying to sell the story that Malaya got someone to pick up the kids at the side of the road. She's decided she likes Durwood's story, hasn't realised how illogical it sounds. She's not going to push Durwood's story because that is too obvious in Janie's mind, so she's giving these little nudges. So in this instance, she's saying, well, yeah, sure, they do play in those forts, but they only play in them when my grandchildren are here? And then, of course, Janie has to hurry people on past that statement so that nobody has time to think about what she's saying or to question it. And how does she do that? Once again, she throws in a question. It's a rhetorical question. Just like the previous one, can you imagine a 4 and a 6-year-old going into the woods? Or going through the woods, sorry? It's got the same purpose. Same intended outcome. She wants to stop the questioning on this topic here. She's gaslighting her audience again. She starts by saying they have never wandered away. And you'll notice she suddenly changes tack and changes it to gone in the woods by themselves. One, by themselves. Somebody, one of them has never gone into the woods by themselves, individually. She didn't say by themselves. One of these children, or maybe either one, is not going to go into the woods by themselves. They may go into the woods together. And she says they've never gone into the woods by themselves in the last 2 years. I don't know if this was an intentional attempt at deception or if it was her brain basically hijacking the lie. You've heard me say this a million times. The brain does not like to lie. So you'll hear people, they will stutter, they will stop partway through their sentence and change direction. They might change a word without realising that they're doing it. They might get fading facts where at the end of their sentence they get quieter. Or they might just have a word that is pronounced differently that actually gives things away. So it could well just be leakage, where she says they've never gone into the woods by themselves. One of them. One on their own. Not together. She's not saying they've never gone into the woods together. She's saying that they've never gone into the woods on their own by themselves. One person going by themselves without the other. And then you get the, if you believe this, you're really dumb question. The rhetorical question. Why all of a sudden would they do it Friday morning? Well, for starters, it didn't happen Friday morning. I think we can be pretty damn clear on that now. So we know neither of those children went into the woods by themselves on Friday morning. So there's a subtle bit of deception there already. But the whole thing is, she's trying to say, oh, well, you know, they've never gone into the woods by themselves. One, individually. Why would they start doing it now? Essentially, don't question it, because you're a fool if you question it. And of course, the fact that she's saying by themselves, as opposed to the pair of them going together, totally negates this whole question in the first place. We know Malaya told Belinda they always go up there. So Janie's just playing around with the truth a little bit here, trying to gaslight her audience, trying to shut down her audience.
So Jack and Lily would not have walked in the woods. The only distance they would have walked is up to their little fort that they built. Lily is scared of bugs and spiders, the opposite of Jack.
I'm going to play the first part of that again, because there is one word that stands out significantly.
So Jack and Lily would not have walked in the woods.
There's a real emphasis there on walked. So much so that she pauses after it. I think part of the reason for the pause is the brain going, careful, don't go down that road. You're not allowed to lie. Don't lie. But she says they would not have walked in the woods. Meaning, as she's spoken, her and Daniel have both spoken about taking the kids for walks in the woods. She's referring to going for an adventure, going for a walk through the woods. Not just going to their fort, but going for a walk. The activity of exercising, going for a stroll, going for a walk, as opposed to going up to their fort. And she does then say the only distance they would have walked would be up to the little fort. So it's like her brain has jumped in and said, you better add that extra bit. You've already said they go up to that fort with your grandchildren. So you probably better add that in, otherwise this just sounds like a lie. Now, we've heard her talk about Lily and bugs. Lily doesn't like bugs. Lily doesn't like worms. And she speaks in another part of this about how if Lily saw a fly, she would scream and run inside. And if Jack had a worm, she'd be like, I don't want that. But we've been led down the garden path again. When you think about what she's telling us the simple statement here was that Lily doesn't like bugs and worms and stuff. She gave us a nudge and we ran with it in terms of going, well, that proves they wouldn't have gone up into the woods because Lily's scared of bugs and stuff. Although what she was aiming at here was to try and convince people not just that they wouldn't go up into the woods on their own, but they wouldn't wander off through the woods. This is a really good example of Janie's strategy of giving her audience a nudge in the right direction and pushing them in the way she wants them to go so that they will draw the conclusions that she hasn't actually verbalised. Because she has made a few statements here. She has said the only distance they would walk is up into the fort. Then she follows up with a statement about Lily not liking bugs and stuff. She didn't draw these two concepts together. She introduced these two concepts side by side. The only distance they would have walked is up to the fort, and then straight away Lily is afraid of bugs and spiders and stuff. We as the audience made the connection because that's what she wanted us to do. We made the connection with, well, of course, they're not going to go up there because Lily doesn't like bugs and spiders and stuff. But Janie even explains that to us in a different section, which, because she's not saying it at that moment in time, is probably part of the reason why nobody made the connection. She's saying about Lily in this bug thing and everything, and she says if she sees a fly, she'll scream and run inside. She's not saying Lily's afraid of being outside in case there's a bug or a fly or anything. She's saying that she reacts if she sees one. We've been pushed in the direction of drawing the conclusion that there's going to be bugs and spiders up in the woods. So Lily doesn't like them, so she's not going to want to go up there. But the reality is, she doesn't like them being in close proximity to her. She's never outwardly made the connection saying Lily won't go up to the fort because of bugs and spiders. All she's done is introduce the concept of Lily not liking bugs and spiders alongside the concept of the only distance they would go would be up to the fort. She's basically led us where she wanted us to go, and we've jumped in. Malaya told Belinda always like to play up in their fort. So that shows you that actually Janie's trying to get us to believe something that is not the truth there. She's trying to use the argument of Lily not liking bugs and spiders to convince us that they wouldn't possibly have gone up to that fort, even though she also said that her first thought was to go look up there when she found out they were missing. And of course, one of the clues that tells us to have another look at the way Janie has spoken about the children not wandering through the woods and not going to the fort on their own is the fact that she was throwing in her believe me statements. Janie coming out with believe me, that is one of her biggest tells. That is when we need to pay attention and listen to what she's saying, because she's trying to be deceptive. So like I said, when Janie did this whole Facebook tour, this was after Durwood came out with his story. So she's jumping on the back of that and trying to convince people of this abduction theory. So she's pushing the, no, the children are not in the woods. They would never go up through the woods. To convince people that the only other possibility is abduction. But like I said, Janie wasn't given the full script, in my opinion. Janie was only given a very small script of her own. Probably because Daniel recognised that she might cause problems in terms of their alibi, in terms of their story that they were trying to push, allegedly. But of course, Janie has told us how important it is for her to protect her children, her two boys. So what she's got to do now is go all out to protect Daniel and potentially Justin in any way she can, which is why she's come out with this story that goes above and beyond the script that she was given, in my opinion. Now I'm just going to give you something to think about, and then I'm going to come back to it later. So Janie's trying to establish the notion that these children were abducted. She's trying to convince us that they would never go walking through the woods. They would only ever go as far as the fort. But then she has to double down on it and say, but they wouldn't go up to the fort unless my other grandchildren are there. Well, if she's established that they would never go any further than the fort because Jack doesn't like walking through the woods, Jack would sit down, Jack had to be lifted over branches or wouldn't go under branches. If she has established that there's no way known they would go beyond the fort, why then did she find it necessary to convince us that they wouldn't even go as far as the fort? She's twisted the truth a little bit here and tried to convince people that they'll only go to that fort with her grandchildren. Ergo, the day they went missing, they must have been abducted because they wouldn't have even gone to the fort because her grandchildren weren't there. But we know, thanks to Belinda, that actually they did like to go up to that fort quite a lot. So why wouldn't you just say, I know they wouldn't have left the fort area. They love to go up there. We checked up there. There was no sign of them. That means they couldn't have possibly gone there. Something else must have happened. They would not have gone any further than there because they don't like to go through the woods. Jack doesn't like to climb over the trees or under the trees. Jack will sit down and be stubborn and not want to go. But instead of going with the simple narrative of we checked the fort because that's where they like to play a lot, they didn't go up there. So something else must have happened. They must have been abducted. She has not said any of that outright. Anyway, I'll let you ponder that for a bit and I'll come back to it later in the video. So let's move on to Malaya.
What happened was we woke up, I heard them playing in the next room beside us, and I was drifting in and out of sleep. And they're not the type of kids that we tell them not to go outside on their own. We always make sure that we're out there with them, watching them. And they happen to just get out that sliding door and we can't hear it when it opens.
So we get that really confusing statement from Malaya. They're not the type of kids. We tell them not to go outside on their own. We make sure we're out there with them. And then she pauses and says, watching them. Now, first of all, that last bit, we make sure we're out there with them, watching them. Well, that's a load of BS. I think we can be pretty confident on that. Sure, we can't 100% trust everything that Janie says. We certainly can't 100% trust everything that Daniel says. But Janie's statements always have an element of truth in them. I don't think she made up the story about ringing Malaya and telling her that Jack didn't have his boots on, he didn't have his coat on. I do, however, think that Janie was exaggerating in terms of her watching the children, and that the only time that she ever set foot outside with those children was because her grandchildren were there at the same time. In her statement to the RCMP, Malaya said that she thinks they may have played outside on Thursday evening. Well, if someone is out there supervising them, you'd know, right? And meanwhile, here's the thing. The very same reasoning that allows us to know that it is almost impossible for these children to have been abducted also can apply to them not being supervised outside. And that is, they are in an extremely low risk area. They are on a property that is not within sight of any of their neighbours, not directly. The closest building to them is an abandoned schoolhouse and a cabin. The next residence is quite some distance down the road. This is a rural community where the properties are spread out, where the houses are set right back from the road. This is not some suburban area where you can walk out your front door and see houses in every direction, pretty much packed in. Not only that, but the yard where the children allegedly played is behind the trailer. It's out of sight of the road. The fort where the children allegedly played is out of sight of the road. Sure, Jack was only 4.5, but he had a big sister who doted on him and would have kept a close eye on him while they were outside playing. The activities that these children like to do weren't high-risk activities. They're no more risky than activities that children in suburban backyards would engage in. Lily liked to make things on the play kitchen. Jack liked to dig for worms. Allegedly, they liked to play on the swings. And then they would go up into that little fort in the woods. And there was one interview where they mentioned something about them enjoying playing on the slide. All these locations were a short distance from the house, meaning that if one of them was injured and couldn't go down to the house themselves for assistance, the other one could do so. They were old enough to be able to do that. Not only that, you've seen the video from Tint, where he went to Cindy and Wade's. Malaya grew up in an area that wasn't heavily populated. There was some distance there between her property and the next house. So she probably grew up in a place where she was given a bit of freedom outdoors. Daniel certainly would have been, because he grew up on that property. Can you really see Janie sitting outdoors with a little 4-year-old or 6-year-old Daniel watching him play? Janie, who grew up in the area with 4 brothers. So no one was outdoors with these kids when they were playing. Malaya's just trying to create the impression of a responsible parent, which we now know is far from the truth. But also, why is it important to her to convince people that nothing could have happened outside, because they never go outside without supervision? Malaya and Janie have both been trying the same strategy here. It's a bit of victim blaming. The kids, it's their fault. They normally wouldn't go outside without supervision. This is their fault that they vanished. Because we are responsible parents. We don't allow that to happen. They caused this. Janie, with the why all of a sudden would they decide to wander off into the woods? And then, of course, she moves on to the sliding door and the excuse of we can't hear it when it opens. It's not our fault. The children know they're not allowed outside. And you know what? When that sliding door opens, we don't hear it. Once again, it's all putting it back on the children. But there's something significant in what she said here. She said they happened to get out that sliding door. She said that sliding door as opposed to the sliding door. There is a difference between referring to that thing or the thing. When you start using that, it's because there's a backstory. It's because this is something that has been the topic of discussion. Now, obviously, Malaya doesn't expect the interviewer to be privy to that. But in her head, she has got the full story there going on in her head. So her brain is putting it out as that sliding door, because as she's saying they happen to get out that sliding door, her brain is also including the other facts that are not being verbalised. Probably something along the lines of that sliding door, the one that they always go out of and never bother to shut it properly. I know some people have said, oh look, the sliding door is a distraction, it's got nothing to do with it. But the fact that she's referring to it as that sliding door tells me that there is some significance here to this sliding door. You know, the difference here is that if she were to refer to the sliding door, then that's just kind of like a prop in the story. The sliding door that they went through. That's all there is that involves the sliding door. It's only in the story because they went out the sliding door. There's nothing more to it. We can forget it straight away. But at the moment it's that sliding door, there is some sort of additional information here. And there's also some negativity implied as well. That sliding door. The one that's a thorn in the side. You know, when you talk about that woman, you're not being kind. You're saying that woman because you're making a pointed remark. Yesterday, when I did the vacuuming, I did this room that I'm in first. And then I went and did other rooms. When I was finished, I came back in and Mouse had been busy. The nice new soft bed that I bought them a week or so back, he's already managed to rip a hole in that. And we have this daily game of him ripping the stuffing out and me stuffing it back in. I've decided not to sew it back up because I figure he will just make a hole somewhere else It's just easier, and it actually, for the most part, makes it less entertaining for him because it doesn't feel so naughty, I think. But anyway, I come back in here and the stuffing from this bed is everywhere all over the floor directly after I vacuumed. I was like, that dog? Suddenly he wasn't Mouse. He was that dog. Because I was frustrated with him. I had to turn around and restuff the bed. So yes, it's significant that Malaya refers to it as that sliding door, not the sliding door.
It's been raining and they're probably soaking wet, but with the sun today, I'm hopeful that they are feeling warm.
That statement for me was a major red flag from the beginning. Because she didn't say that she was hoping they'd be dry, warm and dry. She said it's been raining, so they're probably soaking wet. But with the sun, she's hopeful that they're feeling warm. And there was that big pause too before warm. It's like her brain was saying, I can't say that word because it's not the truth. Not only that, when she says I'm hopeful, she swallows the I'm. You can barely hear it. Because she's not hopeful. She knows they're not going to be warm. But why did this sentence come out like this anyway? It sounds like leakage to me. The logical flow of this sentence would be, I'm hopeful that they've managed to dry out and warm up a bit. But she doesn't go there with the hoping they've dried out. Straight away, the warm is what is at the forefront of her mind. She's thinking about her children being out in the elements, out in the horrible weather, and she's just thinking about their need to be warm. She's trying to say she's hopeful, but like I said, she swallows the I'm. It's like normally someone would leave out the I in a statement like that. She's tried to use the I'm, and her brain has basically gone, yeah, you can't say that because you're not hopeful of this, you know it's not the truth. So instead it's kind of been smothered, and we get the hopeful, and we get the odd comment, the odd direction of the comment where she ends up with warm, which is not how you would expect that to go. Anyway, I'm going to put a pin in that one too.
Last night was one of the worst nights because I didn't have them in their beds. And I don't want to go through that another night without them.
So when that interview first came out, we knew nothing about the overnight car runs. We hadn't really we hadn't heard of Janie. So people hadn't really thought much about the possibility that whatever occurred may have occurred on the Thursday night as opposed to the Friday morning. But when I heard Malaya say that, straight away it was a red flag for me. Last night was one of the worst nights. The big problem I had with this immediately was what could possibly be on par with going to bed with your children missing. Because to me, I can't imagine anything that would equal that. When you have 2 of your 3 children missing. But apparently, last night was one of the worst nights. She did this interview on the Saturday. That means that she'd only had one night since the children were reported missing. So this certainly supports the belief that the children, whatever happened, occurred on the Thursday night. Because the reason it was one of the worst nights was because it wasn't the first night. And she goes on to say You know, she didn't have them in their beds, and she doesn't want to go through that another night without them. Again, another night. It makes it sound like it's already been so long. So intolerable. I just can't do this for another night. I do just want to point out here that she's being a little bit self-centered. It's not about worrying about them not being safe and warm in their beds. It's about her not having them in their beds. She's basically redirected to her. Her experience of her children not being in their beds. Not any concern over, I wonder where they're sleeping, I hope they're warm, I hope they're not injured. More, I don't have them in their beds and that affects me. And then the same again, I don't want to go through that another night without them. So already she's feeling pity for herself, showing no concern over the welfare of Lily and Jack, which of course points to the fact that she knew that they were deceased. But at the same time, by redirecting it to her, making about her experience, her not having them in their beds, her not wanting to go through another night, she's pointing to them not being in their beds as a source of trauma. And what's really interesting about that is that the statement that she released a little while ago, by the fourth line, what is she saying? Not being able to tuck them into bed. As a mother, I love my children more than life itself and feel so heartbroken. Not being able to hold my two children, Lily and Jack, kiss them, breathe in their scent, or tuck them into bed. She's not referring to the more intimate kind of things, to be able to see their faces, to hear their voices. Yes, these are things that she brings up further on in the letter, but when you look at her interview and her statement, the thing that is at the forefront for Malaya is not having her children in their own beds. She's prioritising that even above any sort of personality quirks. And of course, when you hear her say this makes it stand out even more that when she's talking about Thursday night, she's apparently got no idea what time she put her children to bed. Anyway, I am going to come back to this later on in the video because I want to move on to Daniel.
Yeah, and so, some folks are saying that, they may have walked out the back sliding glass door. That seems like the only logical explanation for them to have exited the house. You had something on the front door, correct?
Yeah, on the front porch, there's the front porch door, and then there's the inner door on the front. And I know for 100% they did not go out through that door. So, because when I went and got the keys and tried to come back into the house, couldn't get into the front door, right? I had to go around from the back. And then I went out through the front door.
Gotcha.
So that's how I know they did not exit through the front. They exited out through the back sliding glass door.
Now, I'm not going to go into the fact here that he's forgotten his original story, which was basically that there was a bit of metal or there was a wrench or something wedged in the door and he broke the door, pushing it open. The point here is that he is saying that door was essentially disabled. It was either locked or blocked or both. So the significance of what he is telling us here is that the only way the children could have got in and out of the house is through that sliding door. There's never any mention of the other back door, the one that would be near their bedroom, and I'm willing to bet that that door is either permanently disabled or that area behind the door inside is probably just like a storage area, because it really doesn't look like that is an area that gets used. And the fact that they don't even try to disqualify the possibility of the children using that door, that it hasn't even occurred to them to address that door, that to me suggests that, yeah, that door doesn't get used, that door is probably permanently locked, probably permanently blocked. Aside from that door being in a somewhat out of the way area, if we look at where things were at when Janie did her interview with Ali from CBC, you can see that the effort that's been put into fixing up the property, presumably because they're not allowed to have the children there again until it's all fixed up, although I suspect that it could be a long while before Daniel gets to see any of his children on that property. But they have done the front decking, the front steps, they've done the decking and the steps, or they're working on the decking and the steps by the screen door. They did all those buildings at the back, the woodshed, whatever else the other buildings were around it. And yet it appears that there's been no effort made to do anything more to the steps that go up to that other door, which also to me suggests that it's not something that gets used. So it does, to me, suggest that Daniel is establishing here the only way in and out for those children is that sliding door.
Now, I've read in the document that Malaya said something to the effect that the kids didn't always close the door behind them when they went outside. It kind of made it seem like there was times that they did. Is that accurate, or was that something that when they went outside?
I mean, the percentage that they would actually close the door behind them, it's very minimal.
But they haven't done it in the past, though, correct?
It's usually, I mean, Daniel, even I don't close the door all the way sometimes.
Oh, okay. And so it was all the way shut.
Yeah, it was all the way shut. I mean, fully all the way shut.
That is weird.
So, and and some of the investigators, when they were here, they came all the way down to the bedroom, sat on the bed, and we had a dead quiet. And they tried to open up the door. Well, I think it was Mom who went out there and opened and just closed the door, and he couldn't hear it from inside the bedroom, sitting on the bed with the bedroom door shut.
Yeah.
So,
is the door heavy?
It is heavy, but when the kids got their hands on it, they would have to put both hands on it, and they could slide it closed.
Okay.
So it is possible for them to close it. They just need to, work at closing it.
Now, despite the fact that Daniel, Malaya and Janie contradict each other with everything else, one thing that they've all focused on is this damn door. They've all made it central to their stories. Not only that, this is the one time that Daniel and Malaya's stories match. They claim that the children usually don't close the door. Now, when Janie did this interview and she got Ali to open and close the door, the whole point of the demonstration, of course, was to prove that the door was silent. But what it proved to me was that those children would not have been able to close that door. Because when you watch Ali as she closes the door, you can see that she has to actually physically lift the door for it to catch. You'll see her shoulder tip up a bit as she gives it that final lift to make it latch. This door had dropped on its runners. I think it would have been almost impossible, even for two children, to have been able to get that extra bit of lift in that handle to make the door shut. They don't have the height advantage that adults have. So instead of a lift, it would be a push, which is so much harder. And we're talking about a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. Daniel himself says, even I don't always close it. He's not actually admitting it there, But I'm willing to bet that's because it's a bugger to close. Because it needs new rollers underneath. Because it's dropped. So it has to be lifted up. Just that little bit to make it latch. And in fact, Daniel himself tells us this with his body language during this interview. I'm going to play the 2 instances where he refers to closing the door, and you see him do the physical action with his hand, and you'll see each time he lifts it up.
Fully all the way shut. It is heavy, but when the kids got their hands on it, they would have to put both hands on it and they could slide it closed.
So that door would have been almost impossible for those children to properly close it and make it latch. And I suspect that this was probably a bone of contention between Malaya and Daniel, and possibly a cause of tension in the household. And actually, this is something that I have suspected since the first time I saw Malaya's interview. And for me, Daniel confirmed this in this interview on the Turkey Show. You know, he said the percentage of them actually closing this door is minimal in terms of them having it all the way shut. And then he said this statement that to me was a little bit of a red flag. They just need to work at closing it. When you say someone just needs to do this, you are expressing exasperation, frustration. You are showing that in your opinion, they're not making an effort. It has the implication of criticism. You could do this if you would just try harder. So from listening to Malaya and Daniel talking about the children not sliding this closing door, that definitely says to me this is a cause of tension in the household. Daniel's words suggest to me that it is something that really ticks him off, and Malaya is aware of that. Based on everything we know about the relationship between Malaya and Daniel, everything we know about the way Daniel was with the children, I'm willing to guess, I would almost put money on it, that this issue with the children not closing the door was one of the things that Daniel was using to maintain this whole coercive control thing. Basically, Malaya, your kids don't know how to behave. You're not being tough enough on them. You're not teaching them the right thing to do. They always leave this door open and I have to close it. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what's gone on, but that's the sort of thing you see in these coercive relationships. It's not that just the children who would be blamed over this door not being closed every time, but it would also be put back on the mother or the biological parent. You are a failure as a parent because you can't even get your children to do this one thing. This comment by Daniel, they just need to work at closing it. I'm willing to bet he's said some very similar things to Malaya about the exact same issue. So, given this is already an hour long, and I usually prefer not to go much over an hour, I know my premiere was more than that the other day, but I try to keep my videos under an hour, or at least, not much over an hour. So I'm going to do this in 2 parts. So this is a good spot to stop. I will recap some of this at the beginning of my next video. But I think having covered Janie's statements, Malaya's statements, and started on Daniel essentially addressing the sliding door, then if I address the other statements that I have from Daniel in the next video, that will also help me to give you a bit of a recap from this video. So hopefully you'll join me for that one tomorrow. So on that note, thank you for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Help me try and reach that 7,000 subscriber mark by the end of the year. Also, please hit the like button. That helps get my videos out into the algorithm. I know I'm hearing people say that they didn't even know that my videos were uploading. And of course, finally, please leave a comment below. I do look forward to reading your comments. I know I don't always get around to replying to people's comments, but I do read your comments. I appreciate your comments. So on that note, thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.
I begin to wonder